Sometimes the smallest gift arrives from the soul that needs saving the most. Before the sun rises over the Oregon coast, the world feels suspended between darkness and memory. A cold mist drifts in from the Pacific, wrapping the quiet neighborhood in a blanket of silver gray. The scent of salt hangs in the air. Wind brushes softly through cedar trees. And on a lonely stretch of shoreline road, one house remains dark while every other porch light has already begun to glow. Caleb Morrison sits alone at his kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee that has long gone cold. At 39 years old, the former Navy SEAL still carries himself like a man trained to notice everything. Broad shoulders, strong hands, weathered features. But there is a heaviness in his pale blue eyes that no amount of discipline can hide. 3 years have passed since he left the teams. 2 years since he stopped answering most phone calls. 1 year since he stopped celebrating birthdays altogether. These days, silence is easier. Silence asks nothing from him. Silence never reminds him of what he has lost. The old wall clock ticks softly above the refrigerator. Outside, gulls cry somewhere beyond the fog. Caleb rubs a hand across his face and prepares for another ordinary morning. Then he hears it. A faint scratch against the front porch. Once, twice, then nothing. His brow tightens. He sets the mug down and walks toward the door. The wooden floor creaks beneath his feet. When he pulls the door open, the cold morning air rushes inside. At first, he sees nothing except drifting mist and damp grass. Then his eyes lower. A small object rests directly in front of the welcome mat. An old child's sock. Faded blue. Slightly damp from the night air. Carefully placed. Not dropped. Not blown there by the wind. Placed. Caleb stares at it for a moment, confused. Then movement catches the corner of his eye. About 15 feet away, standing near the edge of the driveway, is a German Shepherd puppy. The little dog cannot be more than 4 months old. His sable coat is fluffy and uneven, still carrying the softness of puppyhood. His oversized paws look too big for his body. Amber eyes shine through the fog with a strange mixture of caution and hope. The puppy sits perfectly still, watching, waiting. Caleb glances from the sock back to the dog. The puppy tilts his head slightly. Not frightened, not begging, almost as if he is expecting a reaction. For several long seconds, neither of them moves. The wind whispers through the trees. Somewhere beyond the fog, a buoy bell rings across the water. Then the puppy gives a single wag of his tail, turns quietly, and disappears into the morning mist, leaving Caleb alone on the porch with a child's forgotten sock and a question that somehow feels much larger than it should. Caleb stood on the porch long after the puppy disappeared into the fog. The cold sock remained in his hand, strangely heavier than it should have been. He turned it over once, then twice, searching for some clue that might explain why a dog had delivered it to his doorstep before sunrise. There was nothing remarkable about it. No name stitched into the fabric. No note attached. Just a small blue sock that had clearly belonged to a child. Eventually, he carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. The house returned to silence. Yet something felt different. The stillness that usually comforted him now seemed unsettled, as if a tiny stone had been dropped into a motionless lake. Throughout the morning, Caleb tried to focus on his routine. He repaired a loose section of fencing behind the house. He organized fishing gear that did not need organizing. He cleaned tools that were already clean. But every so often his eyes drifted back toward the blue sock sitting alone on the counter. By late afternoon, rain clouds had begun gathering over the ocean. The air smelled of wet cedar and approaching weather. Caleb was preparing dinner when he noticed movement outside the kitchen window. The same puppy stood near the back gate. This time the little German Shepherd carried something in his mouth. Caleb stepped outside cautiously. The puppy froze for a moment, studying him with those bright amber eyes. Then he trotted forward, placed his treasure on the grass, and backed away. Caleb looked down. It was a cheap plastic sheriff star, the kind sold in toy stores for a few dollars. Scratched, faded, missing part of one point. He frowned. The puppy sat quietly several feet away, tail brushing the grass. Caleb picked up the toy. The puppy immediately wagged harder, almost proud of himself. For the first time in months, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Not quite a smile, but close. "What are you doing, little guy?" he asked softly. The puppy responded with a small bark. Then he spun around and raced toward the road. Caleb watched him disappear once more. The following morning, just after dawn, another gift appeared. A smooth seashell rested beside the welcome mat. The morning after that, it was a weathered toy car missing one wheel. Then came a red button, a colorful marble, and a tiny wooden bird no larger than a thumb. Day after day, the gifts arrived. Day after day, the puppy vanished before Caleb could follow. Soon a row of strange little treasures stretched across the kitchen shelf. Anyone else might have called them worthless. Yet Caleb found himself studying them each evening. Somehow they carried traces of forgotten childhoods, family memories, and simpler days. Things he had not allowed himself to think about in years. And although he refused to admit it, every morning he now woke up wondering what the puppy might bring next. The pattern continued for nearly 2 weeks. Every morning, before the fog lifted from the shoreline and before the fishing boats appeared beyond the harbor, another small treasure waited outside Caleb's door. What surprised him most was not the gifts themselves. It was how quickly he had begun looking for them. A man who once spent days crossing oceans and deserts without thinking about tomorrow now found himself wondering what a puppy might leave on his porch at sunrise. The realization bothered him. Yet it also stirred something he had not felt in a long time. Anticipation. One gray Thursday morning, the air carried the scent of rain and seaweed. Caleb opened the front door expecting another shell or toy. Instead, he froze. Resting carefully on the welcome mat was a military dog tag. For a moment his heart seemed to forget how to beat. He bent down slowly and picked it up. The metal felt cold against his fingers. Weathered. Scratched. Old. Caleb turned it over. His pulse quickened. The engraving was faded almost beyond recognition, but one word remained visible through years of wear. Morrison. His own last name. A chill moved through him despite the heavy sweater he wore. He had not seen that tag in years. During a difficult season after leaving service, many personal belongings had disappeared during a move between rental properties. Most had been replaceable. That tag was different. It had belonged to his father, a Navy corpsman who had passed away when Caleb was only 23 years old. Somehow, impossibly, the little puppy had brought it back. Caleb stood motionless on the porch while fog drifted across the road. Questions flooded his mind. Where had the dog found it? How far had he traveled? Who owned him? The puppy appeared several yards away near the mailbox, watching silently. For the first time, Caleb did not wait. He stepped off the porch and walked toward him. The puppy immediately turned and trotted away. Not running, not escaping, almost inviting him to follow. Caleb crossed the yard. The puppy crossed the street. Caleb followed. The puppy glanced back, making sure he was still there. Together, they moved through quiet lanes lined with weathered beach cottages and wind-bent pine trees. The neighborhood was waking slowly. A newspaper landed on a driveway somewhere in the distance. Wind chimes sang softly from a nearby porch. The puppy continued leading him forward. After several minutes, they reached the oldest part of town near a forgotten stretch of shoreline. There the houses grew smaller and farther apart. Paint peeled from fences. Wild grass pushed through cracks in the pavement. The puppy stopped beside an aging white mailbox leaning slightly toward the road. Then he sat down and looked up at Caleb. From somewhere behind the small cottage beyond the mailbox came the faint sound of laughter. A child's laughter. Soft. Bright. Genuine. Caleb had not heard a sound like that near his home in a very long time. And somehow, standing there with his father's dog tag in his hand, he felt that the mystery of the gifts was finally beginning to reveal itself. Caleb remained beside the leaning mailbox for several seconds, listening to the laughter drifting through the cool coastal air. It was the kind of sound that seemed almost out of place in that weathered corner of town. Simple. Unburdened. Alive. The puppy rose from the grass and trotted toward the small cottage. Its white paint had faded beneath years of salt air and winter storms. Flower boxes hung beneath the windows, though only a few stubborn blooms remained. A wind chime made from seashells turned gently beneath the porch roof, filling the silence with soft notes that sounded almost like distant music. Caleb followed slowly. As he approached the gate, the front door opened. A young girl stepped onto the porch carrying a watering can nearly as large as her arms. She could not have been older than 9. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and freckles dotted her cheeks. The moment she spotted the puppy, her face lit up. "Scout," she called. The German shepherd bounded toward her immediately, tail wagging so hard his entire body seemed to sway. Caleb stopped near the fence, uncertain whether he should continue. The girl noticed him then. Her smile faded into surprise. For a second, neither spoke. The ocean breeze moved through the tall grass between them. Finally, she glanced at the dog, then back at Caleb. "You are the man from the blue house near the cliffs," she said. Caleb nodded. "I guess I am." Her eyes widened slightly. "Did Scout finally bring you here?" The question caught him off guard. "Finally," he asked. The girl smiled sheepishly and looked down at the puppy. "He has been trying for days." Caleb felt a strange mixture of confusion and curiosity. Trying to do what? Before she could answer, a cough sounded from inside the cottage. The girl turned immediately toward the doorway. "1 second," she said softly. She hurried inside, leaving the screen door swinging gently behind her. Through the open doorway, Caleb caught a glimpse of a modest living room. Worn furniture, family photographs, a folded American flag resting carefully on a bookshelf. The sight stirred something familiar inside him. The puppy sat beside the porch steps and watched Caleb patiently, as if he had accomplished an important mission. A few moments later, the girl returned carrying a folded blanket. She draped it over a rocking chair before settling beside Scout. The puppy rested his head on her knee. "My name is Emily Harper," she said. "And this is Scout." Caleb looked down at the dog. "Scout seems to know a lot about me." Emily giggled softly. "That is because he likes you." Caleb almost laughed at the simplicity of her answer. Almost. Then his gaze drifted to the dog tag, still resting in his hand. The old metal reflected a sliver of gray afternoon light. Emily noticed it immediately. Her expression changed. Not fear. Not worry. Recognition. "He found that one last week," she said quietly. Caleb looked up. "Last week." Emily nodded. "He keeps finding things that belong to people. I think he remembers where lonely things are hidden." Caleb looked at Emily for a long moment, unsure whether she was joking or speaking with the simple honesty that only children seemed able to possess. The wind carried the scent of the ocean across the yard. Scout remained beside her, content and quiet, his amber eyes moving between them. "Lonely things?" Caleb asked gently. Emily nodded. "That is what my mom used to call them." Her voice softened when she mentioned her mother. She said some things get lost because people stop looking for them, not because they are gone. Caleb lowered his eyes to the old dog tag resting in his palm. Suddenly, the metal felt heavier than before. Emily brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and continued. "After my mom passed away, Scout started bringing things home. At first, it was just little stuff from the beach. Then he started finding things that belonged to neighbors. A missing key, a baseball glove, a wedding photo somebody thought was gone forever." She smiled faintly. People would come by and thank him. Caleb glanced at the puppy. Scout seemed completely uninterested in the praise, busy studying a butterfly drifting through the yard. And somehow he found this. Caleb asked, lifting the tag slightly. Emily nodded. "He dug it up near the cliffs after a storm." Caleb felt his chest tighten. The cliffs she mentioned were nearly a mile from his house, the place where he often walked alone when memories became too loud. He remembered standing there countless evenings staring at the water, carrying burdens he never spoke about. The thought that this little dog had somehow uncovered a piece of his past from that same stretch of coastline felt almost impossible. A screen door creaked open behind them. Caleb turned and saw a man step carefully onto the porch. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a gentle expression. A light jacket hung loosely from his shoulders. Though he moved slowly, there was quiet strength in the way he carried himself. Emily immediately stood. "Dad, this is Caleb." The man smiled warmly. "I have heard about you." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You have?" "Every morning for 2 weeks," the man replied. "Scout comes back from his deliveries, and Emily tells me exactly what treasure he left on your porch." A small laugh escaped Caleb before he could stop it. It surprised all three of them, including himself. The man extended his hand. "Ryan Harper." Caleb shook it firmly. Something about Ryan's calm demeanor felt familiar. Not because they had met before, but because they carried similar shadows. Men who understood silence. Men who had learned how grief could settle into the corners of everyday life. As they talked, Scout suddenly rose and disappeared behind the cottage. A moment later, he returned carrying something else. He trotted straight toward Caleb and carefully dropped the object at his feet. It was a small picture frame. The glass was cracked, but the photograph inside remained untouched. Caleb picked it up slowly. His breath caught. The image showed a smiling woman standing beside Emily years earlier. Written across the bottom in faded ink were 4 simple words. Keep sharing the light. Caleb stared at the photograph while the afternoon light softened around the porch. The woman in the picture had kind eyes and a smile that seemed capable of making people feel welcome without saying a single word. Emily gently touched the corner of the frame. "That is my mom," she said. Her name was Grace. The wind stirred the seashell chime overhead. For a moment, nobody spoke. Ryan rested one hand on the porch railing and looked toward the ocean. "She believed every person carried a light," he said quietly, "even when they forgot it was there." Caleb lowered his gaze to the words written beneath the photograph. "Keep sharing the light." Something about the sentence lingered in his chest. It reminded him of advice his father used to give before deployments. Different words, same meaning. The kind of wisdom people leave behind when they know love matters more than being remembered. Emily smiled at Scout, who had settled beside Caleb's boots. "Mom used to leave little surprises for people." Caleb looked up. "What kind of surprises?" "Cookies on doorsteps. Thank you notes. Wildflowers in jars. Things like that." Emily laughed softly. She said small gifts could make lonely days smaller. Ryan's eyes warmed at the memory. After she passed away, Emily started doing the same thing. Emily suddenly looked embarrassed. She focused on scratching behind Scout's ears. The puppy leaned happily against her knee. Caleb slowly began connecting pieces that had not made sense before. The mysterious gifts. The carefully chosen objects. The way Scout always seemed to know exactly where to leave them. He glanced at Emily. "You trained him, did you not?" Her cheeks turned pink. "A little." Caleb could not help smiling. "A little." Ryan chuckled. Scout was supposed to be a family dog. Emily turned him into a neighborhood delivery service. For the first time in years, laughter felt natural inside Caleb's chest. Not forced. Not polite. Real. The sound surprised him enough that he shook his head afterward. As the conversation continued, clouds drifted across the coastline and painted moving shadows over the yard. Caleb learned that Ryan worked remotely from home because lingering health challenges made long commutes difficult. He learned that Emily spent afternoons helping neighbors whenever she could. And he learned that Scout had arrived as an abandoned puppy months earlier, soaking wet after a coastal storm, wandering alone near the harbor until Emily brought him home. He was scared of everything, Emily said, except people who looked sad. Caleb glanced at the puppy. Scout looked back immediately, tail thumping against the porch boards. "That explains a lot," Caleb murmured. Emily tilted her head. "You looked sad the first day." The words were innocent, honest. They landed deeper than she realized. Caleb looked toward the distant horizon where the ocean met the sky. He thought about the empty rooms waiting at home, the unopened letters, the quiet dinners, the years he had spent convincing himself he was fine alone. Scout rested his chin on Caleb's boot. A simple gesture. Warm, trusting, present. And for the first time in a very long while, the silence inside Caleb no longer felt quite so empty. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm Caleb had almost forgotten was possible. Every few days, he found himself walking the mile to the Harper cottage without planning to. Sometimes he brought fresh fish from the harbor market. Sometimes he repaired something that needed fixing. A loose fence board, a stubborn porch step, a rain gutter bent by winter weather. He never announced he was coming. Somehow Scout always seemed to know. The puppy would be waiting near the mailbox, tail wagging furiously as though greeting a lifelong friend. One Saturday afternoon, the sky stretched bright and blue above the coastline. The scent of pine drifted inland from the bluffs while gulls circled lazily over the water. Caleb sat on the porch with Ryan, sharing coffee while Emily sketched pictures at the small wooden table nearby. Scout slept at their feet, one oversized paw draped across Caleb's boot. It was such an ordinary moment that it caught Caleb off guard. For years he had believed peace would arrive through solitude. Yet here it was, sitting quietly beside him in the company of people who expected nothing from him except his presence. As the afternoon sunlight softened, Emily suddenly disappeared into the house and returned carrying a small notebook. The cover was worn from use. She held it carefully, almost reverently. "This belonged to Mom," she said. Ryan's expression softened immediately. Emily opened the notebook and flipped through several pages filled with neat handwriting. Notes, quotes, little reminders written over the years. Then she stopped on one page and handed it to Caleb. He read the words silently. If you meet someone carrying a heavy heart, do not try to carry it for them. Just remind them they do not have to carry it alone. Caleb stared at the sentence for several seconds. Something tightened in his throat. Ryan looked toward the ocean and smiled faintly. That sounds exactly like her. Emily pointed toward Scout. I think he remembers that better than any of us. Caleb looked down at the sleeping puppy. The little German shepherd had grown noticeably larger since the first gift appeared on his doorstep. Yet the innocence in those amber eyes remained unchanged. Suddenly Caleb understood something that had escaped him until now. The gifts had never been about the objects themselves. Not the sock, not the shell, not the toy car, not even the dog tag. They had been invitations. Small bridges built one piece at a time. Every strange treasure had pulled him a little farther from isolation and a little closer to people again. Scout stirred in his sleep and pressed closer against Caleb's leg. The former Navy SEAL rested a hand gently on the dog's back. Warm sunlight settled across the porch. Somewhere beyond the trees, waves rolled steadily toward shore. And for the first time in many years, Caleb no longer felt like a man standing outside of life looking in. He felt like he had finally found his way home. Autumn gradually settled along the Oregon coast, painting the hillsides with gold and rust while cooler winds rolled in from the Pacific. The days grew shorter, yet Caleb found himself spending less time alone inside his house and more time walking the familiar road toward the Harper cottage. What began as occasional visits slowly became part of life itself. Some evenings, he helped Ryan stack firewood before rainstorms arrived. Other afternoons, he sat with Emily at the kitchen table while she worked on school projects, offering advice whenever she asked for it. Scout remained at the center of everything, moving from room to room with the quiet confidence of a dog, who believed every person in the house belonged together. One Saturday morning, nearly 3 months after the first gift appeared on Caleb's porch, a heavy fog blanketed the coastline. The world outside looked soft and distant, as though wrapped in white cotton. Caleb arrived carrying a box of fresh pastries from the bakery in town. As he stepped onto the porch, he noticed Emily sitting alone in the rocking chair. She held her mother's notebook against her chest. Her smile appeared smaller than usual. Caleb sat beside her. "Everything all right?" he asked gently. Emily nodded at first, then shook her head. Today would have been Mom's birthday. The words hung quietly between them. The wind chimes stirred above the porch. Somewhere beyond the fog, waves rolled against the shore. Caleb looked out toward the ocean for a moment before speaking. "She sounds like someone who made people feel important." Emily smiled faintly. She did. They sat together in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that allows hearts to rest. After several minutes, Emily opened the notebook and turned to the final page. A folded piece of paper slipped free and landed on her lap. She blinked in surprise. "I have never seen this before." Carefully, she unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to Grace. Ryan joined them on the porch while Scout curled beside their feet. Together they read the note. It was short, simple, beautiful. "If you are reading this someday, remember that love does not disappear when people leave. It changes shape. Sometimes it becomes a memory. Sometimes it becomes courage. Sometimes it arrives through unexpected friends. Keep your hearts open. God is very good at sending people to each other." Emily wiped away a tear and smiled at the same time. Ryan placed an arm around her shoulders. Caleb lowered his eyes toward Scout. The puppy had grown into a strong young German shepherd now, but in that moment, he looked exactly like the little dog who had once appeared in the morning fog carrying a faded blue sock. Caleb finally understood the truth completely. The greatest gift had never been any object Scout delivered. The greatest gift was the path those small treasures created. A path that led one lonely man back to friendship, back to purpose, and back to the kind of family that love quietly builds when nobody is looking. Spring arrived quietly along the Oregon coast. Wildflowers pushed through the grass beside the roads. The mornings carried the scent of rain and new growth. Fishing boats returned to the harbor beneath pale golden sunrises, and the sea no longer felt cold and distant. It felt alive. Nearly a year had passed since the morning a small German shepherd puppy appeared outside Caleb's door, carrying a faded blue sock. Some things had changed slowly. Others had changed all at once. Caleb's house no longer sat in darkness every evening. The front porch light glowed most nights. Laughter occasionally drifted through open windows. A second coffee mug often rested beside his own on the kitchen counter. The collection of strange treasures still occupied the shelf above the fireplace. The sock, the sheriff's star, the shell, the marble, the wooden bird, the toy car. None of them were valuable. Yet Caleb treasured them more than anything money could buy. One calm Saturday morning, he walked down the beach with Emily and Scout, while Ryan followed a short distance behind carrying a picnic basket. The sky stretched clear and blue above the Pacific. Waves rolled gently onto the sand, leaving ribbons of white foam that sparkled beneath the sunlight. Scout raced ahead, no longer a tiny puppy but a strong young German shepherd with a confident stride and bright amber eyes. Every so often he looked back to make sure everyone was still together. Emily laughed and pointed toward the water. Scout immediately changed direction and bounded after a drifting piece of seaweed, as though it were the greatest treasure he had ever discovered. Caleb smiled. The expression came easily now. They reached a quiet stretch of shoreline and settled near a cluster of driftwood logs. As Ryan unpacked lunch, Emily wandered toward the wet sand carrying a stick. Several minutes later she called out, "Caleb, come look." He walked over and found her standing beside a message she had written across the sand in large letters. "You are family." The wind moved gently around them. Seagulls floated overhead. For a moment Caleb could not speak. Emily slipped her hand into his. Ryan stood nearby with a grateful smile. Scout trotted over and sat proudly beside the message as though he had personally supervised its creation. Caleb looked at the little family beside him and felt something settle peacefully inside his heart. Not excitement, not relief, something deeper. The feeling of finally arriving where he was meant to be. The ocean continued its endless rhythm beyond the shore. Sunlight danced across the waves. Scout rested against Caleb's leg exactly as he had done so many times before. And in that simple moment, surrounded by friendship, memory, loyalty, and love, Caleb understood a truth that would stay with him forever. Sometimes God does not send answers in grand miracles. Sometimes he sends a puppy carrying small gifts through the morning fog. And sometimes those small gifts lead a lonely soul all the way back home.